Hello and welcome back to Look and Live. We're doing a series where we ask the question, what is God like? And today the answer we'll be giving is, God is like a father and a son. Already that brings up a lot of questions. But if you haven't seen the first video, go back and look at last week's where we discussed God is love. And we're going to sort of expand on that today and explore a little bit of what that means. And the answer we're going to give is God is a father and son. A lot of people can think of a kind of just impersonal force, some divine essence. I think that probably there might be some kind of creator. This might be, you might call this a kind of deist approach. They might not think of God as personal, not involved in the world, not having emotions or characteristics, or not being like us. And I really like the impulse to not assume that God is like us, because that would be really foolish. And C.S. Lewis does a really interesting bit about, is God personal? I'll put a link down below. You can watch a really nice audiobook version of it. And he says that other religions are right, for instance Buddhism, to say that God is not personal. God is not like us. But he says we shouldn't think God is like us. He would be greater than us. So to say God is not personal, but not to say he's impersonal, but to say actually God is hyper-personal. He's more personal than we are. So that's my little mini introduction. I'm going to talk about that more in a second. But what the image we're looking at today is God as Father and Son. Christianity answers this question of is God personal in a radical way. It says God is personal, and he's more than personal. He's multi-personal. He's three-personal. One being in three persons. This is a very weird answer to the question, is God personal? But I think it is brilliant and beautiful. So God is Father and Son. Now today I'm not going to talk about the Spirit. I'm just going to talk about these two, but the Spirit is also there. So remember, when we talk about images of God, we talked about this a bit last week. We don't want to think the image describes everything about God. So God is Father and Son is not the only thing we understand about God. And we also want to remember that God is not, everything to do with the Father and Son doesn't apply to God. So the image is not complete. It's a fuzzy picture. It's an incomplete picture in those two different ways. So God is Father and Son. I'm going to talk about three things after some caveats as to what this, I think, definitely means. Is God is a bond of love and affection. God is relational, and he's more relational even than us. And God is this loving relationship between Father and Son. Number two, the Father and the Son are very alike. They're perfectly alike, actually. And number three, they do the same work. Before we go into those three things in a little bit more detail, I'm just going to address this Trinity question a little bit more, or this how personal is God thing. I love that Lewis thing, that God is not like us in terms of how personal he is, but he's not less personal, he is more personal. I really encourage you to go look at that video. I'm going to link below. It's really good. And here's another thing that's helped me, is that you imagine a scale of, on one side, beings, different types of being, and on the top axis is how personal they are. So you can imagine lots of things have being. It just means they kind of exist, right? So you get some mud. That has being, but it's not personal. It's not very specific either. And then you get a rock. That's like, it has being. A rock has being. It's not personal still, but it's a bit more specific than the mud. And then you can go up to an animal. Now an animal has being, and it has individuality, has specificity. You can get to know an animal, you can get to know a dog and love it to some degree. But it's not quite personal. It's on the way to being personal. And then you get humans. We have being and we have person. So human can be known and loved and truly understood on a deep, deep level, with language and society and communication and intelligence and so many other things I'm definitely forgetting, which you could include in personhood. And then the next thing on the scale, so we talked about beings which don't have person. We talked about animals, which is sort of not personal, but they're more personal than rocks. And then humans have being and person. And then there's another thing on the scale. There's a being which has more personality, more personhood than humans, and that's God. He's off the charts. He has being and he has more personality than us. So I hope that can help you to understand, because we don't normally think about being and person as being separate things. So I hope that helps a little bit to understand. It's still a deep mystery. We're never going to really grasp the nature of God fully, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But he has given us these tools to understand it. And something like this father-son relationship helps us understand that God is a being with multiple persons. So he's hyper-personal. Okay, so what were the three things we're going to draw out of this image? We have an image of a father and son. The first thing is love. Now, not all human father-son relationships have this characteristic. And that hurts, doesn't it, when that love is not there, or when the father is just not there, which is so common these days. But we long for it, and that longing, that pain it causes when there isn't love between father and son, shows us how it should be. There should be love in a father-son relationship. And love is the defining aspect of the father-son relationship between God the Father and God the Son. They have been in love. They've been loving each other forever. I'm going to reference that same verse I referenced last week, John 17:24. Jesus talks about before anything was in existence, before God made anything, the Father was loving the Son. This is a really beautiful truth to really help us understand the basis and nature of the universe. That love is absolutely fundamental to God, and therefore love is absolutely fundamental to God's creation and to everything. You also hear in like the baptism of Jesus, the Father sends the Holy Spirit down onto the Son. So there's your third person. And he says, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased." Sending the Spirit is kind of almost that bond of love between them is expressed in the Holy Spirit. And this beautiful phrase that we all want to hear, don't we? This approval, this love coming from Father to Son. That is what God is like. God is like that beautiful approval, affection, love, kindness that ought to exist between every father and son. Second thing, the Father and the Son are alike. We have the expression in English, like father, like son. It's a very good expression. It's obvious, isn't it, that a father and son are alike. Now, when we look at God the Father and God the Son, it's even more alike than us, because God the Father and God the Son are one being. You don't see that in a normal father-son relationship. We share DNA. We share a love bond. We share so much. The child is brought up in the Father's image in the way the Father raises them and teaches them, and they learn habits and ways of coping and ways of problem solving from their fathers and all these types of things. But you're not the same being. You're alike. But God the Father and Son have that, but even more. They have the Father and the Son alike. But Jesus even says in John 14, I believe, the beginning of John 14, "If you have seen me, then you've seen the Father." So there's an identity between them that's so tight, you can look at one and you know what the other one is like, exactly what the other one is like. So God is love in the Father-Son relationship. The persons of God are alike. And we also learn that they work on the same things. You've got to understand this is in an ancient culture. And this has been true in so many places, so many times, that a father and son do the same work. But the father hands down the work to the son and they work together. This is a little bit foreign to modern societies because we have a freedom of occupation that's really quite alien to most of human civilization down through the ages. Not that there were no opportunities to change, but it was very common. It was the default through, I think, probably most societies in most of the world through most of time. So the son is to do the father's business. And we see this in the life of Jesus. There's a really fun story at the end of Luke 2 when Jesus is a child, Jesus is young, that Jesus goes missing and neither his father or his mother know where he is, as in Joseph and Mary. They don't know where he is. They both lost him. So, you know, if you've ever lost your child, there's a little bit of solidarity coming from the mother and father of Jesus. And they find him in the temple in Jerusalem, where they've just come from. And Jesus says, why were you looking around for me? Didn't you know I would be about my Father's work? I would be about my Father's business. He thinks it's obvious he would be in the temple. And he's teaching, and people are astonished at his wisdom. He's so young, and he has this authority, this wisdom to teach in the temple. And he says, of course I'm going to do my Father's business. He thinks, it's just natural. I would be doing my Father's work. He says in John, I can't remember the reference, but I'll put it down below, that he doesn't do anything he doesn't see the Father doing. So Jesus is walking completely in step with his Father. There's this beautiful synergy, this beautiful working together, partnership. And when you're in partnership in the world, when you find that person to work with, and you just get each other, and you just work in step, it's so beautiful, isn't it? And that is what's happening in God. Within God, there's this beautiful co-working, this partnership of just doing exactly the right things together, working in the same way, just getting each other. And, you know, when we experience that, what's so beautiful, and that is really what God is like. So, God is Father and Son. That's what we talked about today. What is God like? He's like a father and son. How is he like that? Because he's more than one person. He's hyper-personal. And what does that mean? He has love. That God the Father and Son are in this loving bond of approval and affection and selflessness. That the persons of God are alike, and that they work together for good in the world. This is really good. The fact that God is personal and even hyper-personal means we can know him. Means he can communicate with us. He can meet with us. And that is really excellent news. Thanks for joining me today. There'll be a new video next Friday, still talking about God as Father, but exploring different aspects of that and different ways we interact with it. So, thanks for joining. Come along for some more.